The preterist worldview. I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly. Y'all can correct me if I am, but the preterist worldview. Uh, it's good that it's a very small number of people who actually believe this. But this worldview is, even if I was a Christian, if I believed in the Bible, is does not run in correct thought process of the Bible. So just like many denominations have been created because of the different interpretations of the Bible, in order to make Jesus not into a false prophet, the idea had to be circulated that Jesus returned around 70 CE when the temple was destroyed by Titus, Emperor Vespasian's son, during the War of the Jews time frame. And that is written about by Josephus. So when Titus, who entered into Jerusalem, well, first pulled up all the fruit trees so that he would starve them during their siege, then entered Jerusalem with great fanfare, he tore down the temple. And of course, the Jesus character said that this temple will be destroyed and be built back in 3 days, speaking of the body, as people have looked at it now. But they, of course, the people of that day thought he was talking about the temple itself. And yet the temple was not destroyed at that time frame. Then the people try to look at Titus as fulfilling that prophecy. It is also the fulfillment of a believed fulfillment of prophecy, because the Jesus character says that before this generation dies, there are some who are standing among you right now who will not taste death before I will return. In order for that to happen, it had to have happened within about that 30 to 40 year time frame, because most of the people standing around would have been adults. And since the average lifespan was about 34 years old at that time frame, yes, people did live to be 80s, 90s, because a lot of that is thrown off by infant mortality rates being so high at their time frame, but also people died of toothaches back then. People died of, if you got a deep cut, people died of septic poisoning back then. So many people died of, we didn't have modern medicine that we have today. So they died very early. There was few who lived long. But in order to facilitate this, Jesus had to have returned sooner than later. Even Paul thought that Jesus would return before he would die. And since Paul supposedly theoretically died in around that 70 to 84 CE time frame, we have to have preterism. So the preterist view is completely wrong, because many of the writings of the book of Revelations and in Matthew, Mark, and John and Luke, they do not demonstrate that the things happened at the time, things happened when it was supposed to happen before he returned. You see, before Jesus' return, all the fresh water is supposed to be poisoned. Before Jesus' return, a third of the stars must fall from the sky. Before Jesus' return, the Euphrates River has to dry up. Before he returns, there has to be the Antichrist. Before he returned, all the world will be under a one world religion. We know that none of these things actually happened. The Euphrates didn't dry. 4 angels weren't released and killed 2/3 of the population on the planet. We know that these fresh waters didn't all become poison all over the world. We know that the oceans didn't become blood, not look like blood, but become blood. So none of those things happened. If those things had happened, there would be so much extra biblical writings about them, about how all the aquifers in Rome turned into poison or blood. Never happened. All of the Mediterranean turned into blood. Never happened. That the earth was bombarded by stars. And even if they thought the meteorites were falling stars, where was this big meteorite shower that happened so much so that now you can't see a third of the stars in the sky? Where was the cloud that covered those stars? When did the sun turn its sackcloth and the moon turn its blood? You see, those things didn't happen. So it would make the people who have the preterist worldview just as false prophets or false believers as the Jesus character is a false prophet, in the fact that there were everybody who was alive at the time frame that he was alive have died, and he did not return. It just didn't happen. Where was the transfiguration of all these people who were able to do miracles that were greater than the miracles that Jesus performed? Because according to the Matthew and Mark versions, you are supposed to be transfigured into a state of being where you're able to heal people better than Jesus. Not just walk on water, but maybe walk on lava, hot lava. It's a game me and my kids used to play. Standing on the furniture and had pillows down because the floor was hot lava. Where was all of that happening? When did people move mountains? When did governments fall? When did the people become free? And actually, the Jewish people were freed from the Roman government by the Muslims by a man named Umar. And they thought he was the Messiah for a while. And as far as the 1,000-year reign, if Jesus had established his kingdom when he died, whether in 27 CE or 33 CE, then 1,000, and let's say he came back in 70, there was supposed to be a 1,000-year reign and a new Jerusalem that was established. Well, there's a problem with that. You see, Judaism was still being persecuted for the next 200 years after Jesus. And about 50 years after Jesus, Christians started to have a little bit of persecution as well. Not to the extent that Tacitus writes about it, since he was writing propaganda against the Julio-Claudians. But certainly as we started moving forward into the 2nd and 3rd century, they started enduring more persecution. And then it wasn't until 325 that their religion became supported by the Roman government. It became legal in 318 at the Edict of Milan, but the Council of Nicaea when it gained power. It didn't take over the Roman government until 381, 382, around that time frame. But even at that time frame, Christianity only started to reign over North Africa, the Middle East, and Europe, while the Roman Empire, and just the parts that the Roman Empire controlled. After the Roman Empire was dissolved, different nation states throughout Europe maintained Christianity. But Islam begins to spread all throughout North Africa, all throughout the Middle East, and into India. Christianity only reigned in a certain area. At that time frame, up till 1070, sub-Saharan Africans did not participate in any form of Christianity whatsoever. Neither did the people in the Americas, the people in Australia, nor the people in Asia. So there was no 1,000-year reign. There was no Jesus, no New Jerusalem. None of those things happened from 70 to 1070 CE. So without the 1,000-year reign, then you don't have the devil being let loose for a while so that he can deceive the nations, and that we are now living in a deception time frame that was after the 1,000-year reign. So the math just simply is not mathing when you consider what the preterist worldview is. But because people want to not have Jesus to be a false prophet and still believe in him, there are those few who have adopted this worldview in order for them to facilitate their narrative. And this is the problem with religions in themselves. They are all filled with false prophecies and false prophets. They're all written at a time frames that are decades and hundreds and sometimes thousands of years after the supposed incident occurred, without any eyewitness testimony, without any artifacts, without anything archaeologically that we can say this was true. It is all systems to maintain control over people, and people buy into it out of fear. Fear of not belonging, fear of going to hell or Tartarus or any other type of underworld that is not pleasing. And the biggest fear, the fact that this is the only life that they get, and they are suffering in this life. So there has to be something better than this one. So because of that fear alone, they do not want to engage in actual critical thinking and take responsibility and accountability for themselves. So always remember, you have to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibrations.
This life be over soon. Heaven lasts always. Girl, you ought to bash Mr. head open and think about heaven later.